Hi folks, I've been hearing a lot about alternators getting converted over to little welders, and that's an excellent idea, and I actually like the idea myself. I'm actually going to make myself one, but I'm not going to make myself one and video it. I wanted to really simplify the terms, because I really haven't seen too many simplified terms on making one of these little welders from an alternator. So what I'm going to recommend is find the highest amp alternator you can find, and it don't really matter what type of alternator. There's a lot of folks out there saying this type or that type, but the type really don't matter. What needs to be done is actually really simple, and that's kind of what I want to talk to you about. Here I have different types of alternators. I have a type here which is together. I'm not going to take it apart. So I'm not going to use this one as a demonstration, and I'm not going to use this one as a demonstration, but you can see the back part of this one here and how the layout of it is. So for this type, it's a real simple conversion. You don't even have to take it apart, because you see here's the brush holder. This is the brush holder here, so the brushes are down inside this, underneath this plate. They're down on the side there, and here's your three phases. And here's your negative, and here's your positive lead. So your positive lead would normally go to the battery, and your negative lead would go to your negative. And you can see here, this is the brush. So the one side of the armature, where the slip rings are, which is these things, your brush is right along these, which a brush is one of these, so a brush would right up against this. Well, that's what these brushes are exciting your armature, magnetizing this piece. So what you want to do, and all of that needs to be done for a case like this, is that this here wire would be separated, because basically what you want to do, and always what you want to do, and always what you need to do, is you want to separate the brushes from the stator, and you want to remove little capacitors. So for this example here, for this one here, I just got finished putting new rectifiers in this one. So for this one here is really simple. The only thing I want hooked on the bottom end of this is I want the stator hooked up to the rectifiers. That's all. And I want to remove this little capacitor, and every single alternator is going to have some type of little capacitor, or they're going to have some type of little exciting diode. So you're going to want to remove that exciting diode. All you want on the back side of the alternator, and that goes for any alternator, is you want the stator hooked up to the rectifiers. That's all. Anything else that's connected in any other way needs to be disconnected in order for it to work. If it's not disconnected, then it's not going to work. Excuse me. And the reason why you want to disconnect it is because you want to be able to excite this by itself individually. You do not want the stator exciting that for you, and that usually and normally works through a voltage regulator, and that's how your batteries charge up. Now for this particular one here, I would just remove that little capacitor down there, and that would be it for this portion, the back side of the alternator. And then I have these leads here that are coming out. One is negative and one is positive. And then under normal circumstances, to be a regular alternator, here would be the brush holder. And the brush holder, you see this wire here? This is going to the negative. See, I would put that on there for charging a battery, I would. And then here's your exciting side. This is the exciting side. So this is one of them where it needs to be excited in order for the alternator to start producing any degree of power. For charging a battery, that is. Now for welding, it's a different story. I would not want to hook this wire up, so I would leave this wire off, disconnected, because we want to isolate and keep separated the brushes to the rectifiers. That needs to be separated, isolated away from each other. So you can physically control the brushed portion, which goes with these two. Basically go together, they feed each other, and that's what excites this. Well, you want to be able to excite this separate from the stator doing the job. This is your stator. And how you'll do that is with a separate battery or a separate alternator, or feeding it any kind of even a wall current, DC current, feeding that current. Now some folks say put resistors in between this, but as far as I'm concerned, it's not needed. Here we have another alternator, and I've removed the bolts already. Now I'm just going to pull it apart. Oh, and while I'm at this part, you're going to find that when you do make one of these welders, that the alternator itself is going to become extremely hot. You're probably going to be safe with running and burning through a rod and maybe 2 rods, and then after that, the outside of this is going to get very, very hot. So they need to have a cool down time. The duty cycle on this is going to be very, very low. Very, very low. Not even close to a 100% duty cycle. More like maybe a 2% duty cycle. So 2 minutes per hour type thing. But they cool down actually quite quick, and the cooling down rate is going to be determined on the type of fan that you have in the front part where your pulley is going to be. Because this fan here is going to do the actual pulling of that heat and letting it escape. Now they have different fans out there that you can get that work better. This is just a standard typical fan, and then here's another type of fan that would do the heat release. This type here is not very good. This type here is much better. This type here works, but for the cooling down, it's going to determine what type of fan you have actually cooling it down, and how many breathing holes it's going to have to actually pull that air through. You see on the back of this one, these are the breathing holes here, which is going to cool the rectifiers down quickly, along with the base in the alternator itself, the casting part. Now, this one here I'll pull apart. See, there you go again. There's the armature, and there's the 2 slip rings. So it's the same thing with this alternator, even though it's completely different inside. There's still only certain things that need to take place, and that is to isolate away the rectifier, which is this great big thing down here, horseshoe kind of shaped thing, and your brush holder. And you can see there's a wire here that's attaching the rectifier to the brush holder. So basically that wire would need to be cut, and on this particular one it's really simply done. Just cut that wire and splice into it, add 2 more wires, and run those wires outside of the alternator, and that's all that needs to be done on this one. That's going to do the isolation, and there's a little capacitor down there which needs to be removed. You don't need any capacitance taking place. So this one here is a little bit trickier, and the reason being is that the stator wires are soldered onto the rectifier here, so a little bit trickier there. They basically need to be, unless a person can do it all with leaving these intact without desoldering them, which I imagine a person could. If I'm looking at it and I was going to do it, I'm pretty sure I'd be able to do that. Pull the stator out along with the rectifier. I'd pull everything out as a unit and then work on it at that point, removing the capacitor and separating the brush holder from the rectifier itself. And the only reason you would want to cut this wire and bring it out, because if down the road, say you're in your vehicle and you wanted to have a dual purpose, you want to have an alternator along with a welder, and you could switch them back and forth. Well, it's really easy to switch them back and forth, so it's actually charging your battery. You basically just want to reverse what you've done to end up with the welder. You want to reverse it. So with these two wires, this one wire, you're going to make it two wires going out. You would basically just simply join them back together, and that would be your alternator. And your capacitor, you could do the same thing with your capacitor. You just run out separate wires, and you twist them together, and your capacitor's hooked back up. So it's really simple to actually have a dual, an alternator, and a welder at the same time. Now once you have those isolations taking place, your leads are pretty much the same, except that you're not going to be using the alternator to do the exciting of it. You're going to actually be using the brush holder, which was these two wires here you can see, which normally would be hooked up to a voltage regulator, because this one here has an external voltage regulator, so it's unregulated. And here would be your positive lead for your welder, and here would be your negative lead for your welder, which is basically the body of this thing. So you can bolt it on here, wherever, but that's your positive feed, where your electrode would be going into. The handle wire would be going to this one, and then your ground clamp would be going to the, bolted onto the body or wherever, because it's grounded right out. And then you have your exciting wire, which are these ones right here. That's how you're going to excite it. Now, excuse me. Once you have all this done, and now it's time to try it out and excite it, well, it's really smart. Like I say, it's going to get hot on you as you're melting welding rods. The more rods you go through, because you're welding something together, the hotter the unit's going to get. I mean, it'll get so hot to the point it'll melt down. So you want to be careful, and you always want to kind of keep monitoring how warm it is, because they're not designed to do any kind of continuous welding. But it's a great thing to get somebody out of a jam if they're in the middle of nowhere or in a bush, or whatever they might be doing. Cracking firewood and something breaks, they can weld it back together, and away they go again. Now, my recommendations would be, to help keep it cooler, is that the exciting wire, which you're going to excite the thing from, which is going to power the unit up, and until the unit's powered up, it's just going to freely spin. It's not going to be producing any kind of power whatsoever. I would recommend putting a switch, a click switch, like a toggle switch, up close to your handle where the electrode is going to be going into, and as soon as you're done welding, click off that toggle switch, and it will basically cut off the exciting power. So now it just becomes a freely spinning shaft, basically, with a fan that's going to be on it, like this one here, that's going to draw all that heat buildup out of there, which is going to make it cool down much quicker. And that's what you want. You want to keep this thing cool. The cooler you can keep it, the longer it's going to last, and the less burn-up chances it's going to have to do. Now keep in mind that if you're going to find an alternator, it's only a 60 amp alternator, well, you're limited with power output. So if you can find yourselves a 100 amp, 150 amp, 200 amp alternator, that's the one you want to use. The higher ampage. That's where you're going to get a lot more, the bigger rod size you can use, and the more penetration within that steel when you're welding something together. That's where it's going to create all the mattering in the world of whether it's going to be a good weld and it's going to hold itself together, or whether it's not going to hold itself together and it's going to be just a tacky weld. You want to be able to melt those metals together. So the switch idea to keeping these things cool is a really good idea, and I would recommend doing it. Really recommend doing it. You can have a switch with a relay. So you just click the switch and the little relay shuts off, and or just have a simple switch that shuts it down, basically disconnecting the exciter, the excited router. Armature part, this part here, you don't want magnetized. So you flick the switch, it becomes unmagnetized, which becomes, the stator creates no power. It's creating zero current. And then when it's creating zero current, it's still spinning, just freely, drawing all the heat away from the insides where it's got really, really warm because you're welding. And then when you're ready to weld again, you flick the switch back on, which is going to magnetize this, which is going to make the stator start creating current, and it's going to allow you to weld again. If you really want to get serious with this, you can do some research and actually get different fans, cooling fans, which will really create some suction to pull the air out of this, which will keep it a lot cooler, much, much faster than, say, this type here. This type here is not going to keep it very cool. Better than having nothing, but this type here is just not a good type. If I was particularly going to make a welder that had this type of fan, I would be changing this fan, because I would want it to cool down as quick as I could. This fan here wouldn't do too bad of a job. And if you don't put the switch on there and you just leave it spinning and it's creating power, even though you're not using it, it's still having a hard time to cool down because it's creating power still. It still has current in the lines. Now remember, those lines, that the welding end lines, that's some serious current. You do not want to play with that current. You want to respect that current on those two lines, your negative welding lead and your positive welding lead. You want to respect that current and be very careful that you don't get yourself even close to touching it, or anything else touching as far as that goes. You won't like the outcome. 100 amp, 200 amp alternator can create some serious current that can kill you, and that's what will happen if you start disrespecting the current that it can actually produce. So, good rule of thumb, be careful when you're messing around with something like that. Current doesn't really matter. It doesn't really care of who you are or what you are. It's going to try and get you, and it will get you. No different than sticking your finger in a socket of the wall. It's going to get you. It's going to bite, and it's going to bite hard. So be very thoughtful when you're playing around with that type of thing. I mean, playing around with this type of thing here, it's all disassembled and stuff. There's no risk involved at all except banging your fingers and maybe getting a little cut scrape, that type of thing. But as far as getting a current zap, well, it's not going to happen. But once it's all together and you fasten it to a motor, whether it's a lawnmower motor or a little side shaft engine or a car engine or whatever kind of engine, once this thing starts producing power because you flick the switch up and you've excited the armature, look out! It's going to have some serious power coming out of them two leads, which those two leads would be basically these two. Your positive and your negative. That's where the power is going to be coming. If you just touch it like this, that's a definite no-no. It's going to hurt, and the outcome will not be wanted. Well, I hope I simplified this compared to some of the videos that are out there. There's some great videos out there, but they never really kind of got to the bottom line, and that's what I wanted to do, is to get to the bottom line. The bottom line is, like I say, it's separating the brushes away from the stator, so you can actually excite the armature, which is this, individually. You want to be able to excite this individually. You do not want anything else exciting that except an individual source. And then the stator will create your current that will give you your welding current. And that's all you'll be using the stator for, is current to make your weld. And then it's going to pass through the rectifiers, which is going to create DC current. And that's the current you'll be using for making your weld job. You can see these ones here. One of these is positive and one of these is negative. And I believe this one's negative and this one's positive. That's the conversion it's doing. Those are where your three phases are coming into from the stator, and it's going through the diodes. And this other part here is a massive heat sink, which is cooling down the diodes as the power does its transfer, creating it to DC power. And then you're using the DC power. You can even take it a step higher, and you can even change out the rectifiers and get yourself a heavier duty rectifier, so the power is even greater. And you see these rectifiers here, and then you have this one here. Well, this one here is 100 amp, and these rectifiers here are 60 amp. So there's a big difference, but yeah, it's the same. There's just a big difference between the diodes. They're a stronger diode that's inside. And these ones here, I actually ordered some diodes, and I'm going to repair them. You can see I got the one here full. So when the diodes come in, I have to wait and order the proper size bit. Then I'm going to drill my hole, and I'm going to pop them diodes back inside there, and I'll have myself some new rectifiers. So they sell different size rectifiers for the alternator you're using, and if you want to actually get crazy, you can actually externalize these. You can bring these on the external part of the alternator. They don't need to be in the alternator. You just need to add on to these wires here. That's all you need to do. Add on to them, and you can mount this wherever you want to. But the alternators, the way they have it, they're nicely, you know, one little unit. Nothing's on the exterior of it. It's just one little unit. So remember, folks, when you do get one of these built, if you do get one of these built and you want one of these, remember, you want to keep this part cool. That's what you want to do. You don't want to just build one and then just start welding away. You're going to burn it out. You're going to cook the windings here. You'll just cook them. You'll burn all the slack off, it'll short out, and it'll just cook itself, fry itself out, become garbage. Unless you want to change the stator and stuff like that. So the big key here is keeping this part here cool. That's what you want to do. And you can do that by welding very slow. Not slow, but you know, go through one rod, give yourself a break, let it cool down. Turn off the excited armature. Turn that off so it's not creating any kind of power, any kind of current. Give it a chance to cool down. Flick the switch. Then you're going to have your current that's going to excite the armature, which in turn is going to create your power in your stator, and then you're ready to weld again. Flick the switch. It'll cool itself down. It's going to cut all power, and the power in the stator here will lose itself. So it'll just become a spinning shaft. And that spinning shaft with the fan on there will be cooling this down, and that's what you want to do. You want to keep this as cool as you can. The cooler you keep this, the longer it's going to last. Well, I hope this was simply explained, and thank you for watching. And if you have not subscribed, please do so, and if you have, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, before the video ends, I know I brought the video to an end, so this is just another little wee replay. I forgot to mention something. For the cable sizes you're going to want to use for your welder, you know, you can look at your battery underneath your hood and what your alternator normally feeds your battery. The cables are pretty large, so you want to go with a large cable. That's what you're going to need to use, is a large cable. I'm not going to tell you what size of cable, just a large cable. Compare it to your battery cables, and if you use roughly the same size as your battery cables are, it's going to work well. You can go larger than your battery cables, and it's going to work even better. But don't try and use some kind of house wall wiring or some kind of small wiring. You want to use a multi-strand DC cabling is what you want to use, and you can get yourself some couplers, and you can even mount a little place that you can coupler it underneath the hood or on your bumper or wherever you may want to couple it together, and you can have the cables that are, you know, behind your seat, under your seat, in your trunk, and you grab your cables out and you couple them together. You know, here's an example of a coupling I'm talking about, something on those lines, right? Okay, so this end here would be, your wires would go into it. This is too small, of course, just an example. So your wires would go into it from the back of your alternator, from your positive lead and your negative lead, and it would run into this. Okay, and you can see here positive, negative, here positive, there's negative. So you have that fastened under your hood somewhere, screwed in with those holes. You can get these much larger. And then you have your other end, which is this end, with your welding ends, your ground clamp being your negative, and your electrode holder as being your positive. And then you have that in a 10-foot, 15-foot piece. Then you grab that from your trunk or whatever, and you couple them together, and you've just made your connection. You flick your switch, and you're ready to weld. That simple. I forgot to mention that part in the video, so I'm doing it now. And again, thank you.